I wanted to just come back onto the opening news item.
Right.
And somebody in the chat box had said, or at some point had made the point that Tommy Robinson, if it wasn't for Tommy Robinson, we wouldn't know anything about the grooming gangs. Now, this is going to be a controversial thing to say, but I just would invite people to consider what's being said here. Because the fact of the matter is that um, grooming gangs, as reprehensible as they are and as needing prosecution as they are, that entire thing was, in my opinion, an aside from the criminality of it, an operation by the deep state designed to incite strong feelings in the community on whichever side of the argument you happen to sit, whether you're Asian or white British, because the point that we've been trying to make for since the beginning of that issue was that the grooming gangs could not have operated without the full complicity of the state. They were permitted to do what they did, and we need to be asking why were they permitted to do what they did. Now, the excuse which is given is that people didn't step in because of concerns that they would be accused of being racist in some way. Sorry, that does not wash. Criminality is criminality, no matter who does it. So that's an excuse. The other thing that I want to make, the other point that I want to reiterate once again, is that contrary to much of the rhetoric which is out there, there is zero evidence to support the claim that there is a greater preponderance of sexual abuse of children in one community over another. And in fact, we have been working with the abused in this country for 20 years. And we can absolutely say with certainty that the vast majority of the people that we have been working with have been abused by people who are not Asian. And certainly, well, let's just leave it at that point there. So the question is, if Tommy Robinson has gotten the lid off grooming gangs, he did so with the support of the mainstream press, in a sense, because suddenly that issue became an issue which hit the mainstream and therefore into a much broader public awareness than it had been. And then again, we should be asking the question, why did the mainstream media get onto that story and why now? The other thing that I would make the other point that I would make here is that if you've been watching the UK column since I think around 2016, 2017, we have been highlighting the fact that we started to see rhetoric from the police agencies, and the intelligence agencies suddenly talking about the rise of a far right in this country. And at that time, we said that there was no such thing as a far right in this country. And that if there was a rise of the far right going to take place, it was going to happen because of the efforts of the British deep state. And I believe that's exactly what has happened, in the sense that people of all classes are being radicalized to a certain degree. Now, as I say, this is probably quite difficult for some people to hear somebody saying, but I think we've got to consider the possibility that that's what's been going on. And I think that's really what you were attempting to start the conversation about with your report at the beginning of the program, Charles. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on what I've just said?
Yeah, well, I would absolutely agree with that. I would also cite very early on Raja Mir, because UK Column now has, I think, two interviews with Raja. Ben Rubin's done two interviews with Raja Mir, and indeed he spoke at our on-location event in Cheltenham back in April. And absolute case in point. I mean, he I would say would be the go-to person on the wider issue and the enabling of the grooming gangs. So I think that's absolutely right. I think the danger with and I don't actually mean to necessarily single out Tommy Robinson, but because he has become an icon in certain quarters, and because he does receive much more publicity than anybody who's in effect sending the same message, it is it is very easy to see that every single but the narrative that he puts out, the things that he investigates or expose or whatever terms these things are put in, always have the same conclusion, which is that the villain of the piece is a Muslim, and that is problematic when it overlaps with, let's say, what's going on now, which is this campaign to do something that should be totally innocent. It's the Operation Raise the Colours. So to put flags everywhere. I mean, you go to any European country and people absolutely are flying the national flag off their house. It's completely normal. It should be totally normal, but it's not. It is absolutely being turned into a divisive issue, and it just crosses that line from being proud to be British to proud to be British at the exclusion of whatever else it is. And it's just that the most obvious one at the moment, as evidenced by that, okay, admittedly only one video, but absolutely there are lots more out there, of people tearing down Palestinian flags in order to replace them with St. George's crosses or Union flags. And I think my contention would be that Tommy Robinson's work and the various causes that he promotes and the engagements that he has in a sort of media context are aggravating or creating tensions where none really should exist. And I think that's the problem. And I think people, for the absolutely vast majority of people who are perhaps considering that what's happening with flags and the sort of, people are, feeling some sense of national pride and all the rest of it, absolutely fine. But I think that there will be a huge lack of awareness amongst those sorts of people about the way in which they are, in effect, being manipulated, I think, and how that campaign can very easily be weaponized, and how, again, the other video that showed those chaps who were, as well as painting St. George's crosses on the side of a house, then shouting at people that they considered to be Muslim. I mean, that, seriously, who does that benefit? But I think it is easy to plot a line backwards from that to somebody like Tommy Robinson, simply because none of the material that he covers has anybody else as the wrongdoer. And therefore, it's very, very obvious, and this is the way that sort of media works in terms of messaging, it is very obvious that not only is every single cause that he brings out one that does down Islam as a faith, and specifically people who are described as Muslims in the UK, but on the obverse, and this is exactly what David Miller was talking about, this is to the advantage of the Israel lobby and the Zionist agenda, and that is really, really dangerous.
Who are funding him, and that's why that's the destination of everything that he does, is because that is who is promoting
exactly
him. Now, but the question in the chat box then was, why was Tommy Robinson imprisoned and demonized? Look, we've got to get our heads around how these counter-gang operations work. If that man is standing up, funded by Zionism, pushing out a particular type of message, and then the state puts him in prison for something that he has done, what's the reaction among his supporters, but even among the broader population? Why is the state putting people in prison who were who have been making comments on social media about on so-called right-wing issues on immigration or whatever? Why are they putting those people in prison while they don't put people in prison for other left-wing topics? Why did they have this two-tier policing, two-tier everything at the moment. It's designed to wind people up. I would really urge everybody to read Frank Kitson's book, Gangs and Counter Gangs. He was in charge of the British military operation in Kenya, in Malaya, in Northern Ireland at the very beginning, and so on. He wrote several books on this type of thing. We need to sort of try to get to grips with the types of psychological operations which are run by the state. And this comes back once again. We'll say it once again. Comes back to the change in military doctrine in this country and in other countries, but in this country, in recent years, where this type of activity was something that we exported to other places. To a greater or lesser extent, it is a game that we have played domestically as well, but it is absolutely, all the stops are off now. And the British government is absolutely using these tactics on its own population for 100 different reasons. And if we don't understand the tactics, then we don't understand what's going on around us, and we're going to fall into traps.
Well, this is it. I mean, which is why I sort of wound up by saying it's digital ID. You create enough of this madness, and people will kind of accept anything. Sandy, we've banged on. What do you think about this?
No, I mean, it's been fascinating. I don't think it's banging on at all. It's interesting because I just feel we're at this tinderbox point. It is really a tinderbox at the moment, and and it's very difficult because yes, everyone is being played by the establishment and beyond, and I think it's about. I would like to ask you two, what would your message be to people who are going to turn out on the 13th of September in London? What would your message be to them?
My message, well, where do we start with that? I mean, that's a big question, Sandy, frankly.
Sorry. It's just that I'm playing devil's advocate here because there are people who are genuinely concerned about about what's happening to their country, the destruction in every single way of their country, and then they're being fed all this stuff. These migrants are staying in 4-star hotels. Look at what they're eating. They're eating better than you at home. You're struggling to feed your children, but look at them. It's all it is a big
and right
big
there, right with that
thing.
That comment, you have absolutely hit the nail on the head. That is what's being done to us all.
So and people are going to turn out. I mean, I met two very, very normal, kind of ordinary women the other day who stopped me and they recognized me in the street and they said, "You're Sandy, aren't you?" And "Oh, are you going on the 13th of September?" And I said, "No, not me." And it was really interesting. They said, "Oh, we're going." And they seemed so normal. And I said, "Well, what do you say to them? Because are they being drawn into some sort of thing where they could be used and end up being arrested, or I don't know." I mean, their argument to me was, well, we went on the last Tommy Robinson march and it was well organised, and he was saying you've got to keep calm, you mustn't, and what do you say to that? Because we all know what he's about, and we know what Farage is about. We know that everybody's being manipulated. So what do you say to them when they say we're going on that march?
Yeah, but you say we know. Who knows? You might know. I might know. The people in the chat box might know.
I did tell them. I spoke to them and I said, look, it's really difficult because people do want to fight for their country. They do want to be able to fly their flag, but is it at the expense of pulling down a Palestinian flag when what's going on there is horrendous, and it's the same hidden hand that's organising everything in that respect. And so I just feel that there's so much that people don't understand, and it's almost impossible. I mean, we do our best here to explain it, but I think a lot of people are, it's almost like a very emotive thing, and they are patriotic, and they don't like the destruction, but this destruction is coming in, as I said, with Agenda 2030, in every direction. They're being hit, and this is just a scapegoat. This is the way they vent their anger.
Yes,
And this is why we have to be careful.
but yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. My worry is that their anger is going to be vented in the wrong direction. And I'm not saying that the immigration issue is not an issue that needs to be resolved, but I don't. I think that we're very, very close to the point where that issue is going to be resolved violently, and no matter who's saying keep calm and carry on, that ain't how it's going to be, because you're absolutely right. People have been have been wound up to boiling point. Now, on the issue of the flags, Charles said that flying flags in other countries is normal. If you think about it, the George Cross has been demonized in this country for 30 years, 40 years, because it is a flag which has been associated with the National Front, or with the various other so-called
football
right-wing
supporters.
Well, and the only time, but who made that? Who demonized it in that way? The mainstream press did.
Of
right?
course.
And the only time that you were allowed to bring the George Cross out was when England was playing in the World Cup or in the Euros or something, right? That was the only time you were allowed to bring it out. Otherwise, it was a symbol of right-wing extremism, right? That should be giving people a clue. Right now, on the issue of so I'm not for one second suggesting that the migrant issue should not be dealt with, but dealing with issues when feelings are high, as they are at the moment, you're likely to end up with the wrong outcome. It's the same with the fact of the matter is, Sandy, as you know, with devolution and so on, constitutionally this country is screwed. Our governance is screwed in this country. How do you deal with that? Well, obviously, you've got to have a conversation about how we intend to be governed in the future. But the danger with things at the moment is that actually there aren't very many people in the country know enough about how governance works and how it should work, that they won't be taken down an even more extreme version of the devolution agenda that we're seeing at the moment, and right into the arms of Agenda 2030. That's very, very likely. I believe that the migrant issue is, aside from digital ID, is on a broader issue, is absolutely going to bring us into the arms of Agenda 2030. It's also going to encourage us to support further activities abroad. And so, it's what do you say to people? There is no simple one line thing that you can say to people. It has to be a conversation. And so that conversation, I think, as David said, Charles's first segment today begins this conversation, this particular conversation today. But it doesn't end today, because it has to be something that we have over a longer period of time. So I don't think there's a quick and easy answer to that question.
No. And it's difficult, because when you look at the Olympics, and I always remember, weird though it was, the Olympic ceremony when it was in London, and they had Glastonbury tour, and everyone was sticking their flags in it. Everybody's proud to stick their flag into, they were proud to stick their flag into the tour and say, this is us, we're from Denmark, and there is that sense of national pride, which I think is actually quite healthy in lots of ways, so long as it doesn't become extreme. And I don't think most people in this country are extremists. They're not. They are concerned, but there is an element, obviously, of extreme racism going on, and as we saw in that, I mean, big sort of thuggy people, really behaving very badly, and so, whether that will take hold, I'm not so sure it will. I hope not, but I would hope that people are more measured and really understand, and if they do go to these marches, they actually keep their cool, and don't get involved, because what they want is civil war, and we can't descend down that way.
Yeah,
because
just
then
to clarify,
can.
You're not saying the people on the march want that, but the government wants that.
Yeah, the government want that, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, I think I regret to say, I think that's absolutely the case because, if we think about the emergency powers that were brought in as a result of COVID,
Yeah.
those become much more, uh, there's certainly much more scope for even more draconian limitations placed on people if you are on a war footing.